特別セッションハローワールドフューチャーインベストメントストラテジー for Japan Inc. 株式会社日本の未来投資戦略と題しました特別セッションをお送りいたします。まずご登壇される皆様をご紹介させていただきます。起業家、投資家、パランティアテクノロジーズ共同創業者ピーター・ティール様、経済同友会代表幹事桜田健吾、そして経済同友会幹事日本の明日を考える研究会副委員長南総一郎がモデレーターを務めさせていただきます。それでは皆様よろしくお願いいたします。登壇者の皆様はマイクとカメラをオンにしてお願いいたします。
Okay, so before we start, Peter, what time is your dead end today? We're 15-20 minutes late.
I will stay up as long as you would like me to.
Okay, thank you. I know your hourly wage is pretty high compared to all of us, so just checking in, you know. Stuff does happen, I guess, with these online conferences, so I feel a little bit sorry for the people behind the scenes because they put a lot of effort and time into preparing this conference. So, you know, I hope you're okay with that.
Oh, totally.
Great. So to kick off, Peter, is it okay? You know, we all know who you are, but I'd love to hear how you give your self-introduction.
Oh, I'm terrible at these sorts of things. But, well, what do you want to say me to say about myself?
I don't know. How do you introduce yourself to someone who doesn't know you?
You know, depends on who the person is, but
Okay.
you know, I'm an entrepreneur. I'm investor.
Entrepreneur.
And you know, I started PayPal, started Palantir, and then I was the first investor in Facebook.
Mm-hmm.
Grew up. Was born in Germany, grew up in California, went to Stanford Law School. So I was on this very professional track. And then at some point, I had a quarter life crisis. Wow. I was working at a big law firm, not a midlife crisis, but a quarter life crisis.
Quarter life.
And then ended up, moving back to Silicon Valley in the late 90s. And,
mm-hmm.
And it was sort of at the time of the dot-com bubble. Things were in the air, and ended up starting PayPal around that time.
I see.
Crazy 20 years.
Wow, it's been a fun 20 years, I assume.
You know, it's sometimes fun, sometimes scary.
Yeah.
You know, you sort of think you're going to die every day. Every day you think you're going to die, and you think you're going to take over the world, and you go back and forth between those two things a few times a day.
Yeah. Would you have done things differently the last 20 years?
There are all sorts of things you would have done differently, but that's always an unfair question because mm-hmm. The question is just what would you have done differently given what you already knew at the time, not what you know after the fact. So that's much harder.
What's your previous relationship with Japan? When was the first time you came here?
First time was in 1999. We were just starting PayPal, and we had sort of ideas of trying to form partnerships or look for some investors, and so we did a whole series of international trips. And then first time in Japan was November 1999. So yeah, sort of the peak of the dot-com bubble.
Have you been back recently, or?
I was back sort of late 2019 was the last time. But, I've been there, a number of times over the years. I try to summarize a lot of my ideas about how to build companies in a book called 0 to 1, and it actually did surprisingly well in East Asia, including Japan. And people always say Japan's not a very entrepreneurial place, but people read lots of books, and it did quite well.
Well, we're waiting for you as an investor and as a visitor as well. So hope to see you on your next trip.
Hope to be back in person. Yeah, next time.
Definitely after all this is over, right?
Yes.
Kengo, I don't know if I should be calling you by your first name, but I guess it's in English, so I'm able to do that. But Kengo, when was your first encounter with Peter and your impression of Peter back when you first met him?
Very good question. I've been visiting Silicon Valley for, I don't know, almost 5, 6 years. During that time, I was searching for a great company, unique company, with which I can do business based on a similar philosophy, which is for betterment of society or happiness of society, not just for insurance or society. And it just so happened that my colleague Koichi found a great company, he said, called Palantir. Unique name, isn't it? So I didn't know that the name of the company, but I really want to see the founder of this company because one, this company was led by two philosophers and lawyers. Although, as I repeatedly told Peter, this company is known for a world state-of-art technological company, but still they're headed by two philosophers, right? And of course, Peter emphasized that there are two other colleagues who are great engineer. That's why combination of philosophy and engineering made this great company. Again, but still, when I met him, I felt that he was something different from the normal sort of Silicon Valley type of engineer. I'm sure he's so famous about investment or creation, founder of PayPal and others. But still, I sensed or smelled a philosophy from him because he wants any technology to serve or to be good for the common good of society and for the sustainable life leading to happiness of the people. Nothing to do with the money. So my search for new value is not for just money, of course, something valuable for the society. Then I decided to dig in this country farther and farther. Then I decided to confess my sort of agony about in which direction I should bring my company to. Then I told him I'm going to create a theme park for well-being of my customer beyond the insurance. He responded very positively. Then we decided to get into business and partner.
I see.
Amazing.
Wow, that's a big first meeting.
Yeah, it is. It just happened.
How long ago was this?
3 years ago.
3 years ago?
Mm.
Wow. So, Peter, the name Palantir came up. We all know the name of the company, and congratulations on going public last year. But how would you explain what Palantir is or what Palantir does? I mean, we have a lot of CEOs of big companies today, and we have hundreds of entrepreneurs, young entrepreneurs, as participants in this conference today. But how would you explain what Palantir does?
Well, the name Palantir, it's a literary reference. It comes from the Tolkien books, The Lord of the Rings, which is sort of this fantasy, 20th century fantasy set of books that were written. And the Palantir are these seeing stones in which you can see things in other times and other places, and it helps you sort of understand the world and understand what's going on. And we, the genesis of the company was came out of some of the challenges we had at PayPal, where there was a very big fraud problem, and you had to figure out how to detect fraud, and it was sort of in some ways it was looking for a needle in a haystack, and you basically and the solution we ended up coming up with was this combination of human investigators and automated computers. And I think in Silicon Valley, the bias is often have everything is done by computers, or the old economy, it's everything's done by humans. And we came up with a solution where you had sort of some complementarity, a division of labor between the humans and computers. And then in Palantir, we thought of extending this methodology to a variety of other problems. We started work. Early on, we worked with the intelligence community in the US. The CIA was one of our first investors. And so there was a sort of question about, in the aftermath of 9/11, could you solve the terrorism problem through some sort of creative approaches like this. And then over time, we've worked with, other parts of the US government, other governments, and then corporations. It's probably about half government, half large corporations in terms of our customers. But the technical problem that we solve is that large organizations, whether governments or large corporations, have enormous amounts of data and often are not able to internally even figure out what they have. In theory, they have all the databases and they should know everything they have, but it's very hard to make sense of it. And so you can think of Palantir as a kind of middle layer. The top layer is just the visualization, is the graphics. Maybe the very bottom layer is a super duper computer, but the middle layer is some software that helps you efficiently organize the data, connect the data, and make sense of it. There's sort of all sorts of different ways we framed it, but the time we started with, one of the big buzzwords was always big data, and I think we're in some ways the opposite of big data. We want to make big data small so that you can find what's essential in this in this ocean of information. We have too much information in our world, and we need to distill it into knowledge, and that's what we try to do.
Who's actually a competitor?
Good question.
Well, I often think the best answer is that you don't have any precise competitors. There were certainly, there's some maybe, I don't know, I hesitant to always make this comparison, but in some ways we're like maybe a next generation version of SAP, which is a similar approach. We have a fairly complex software which helps you integrate a lot of different things in a business. But yeah, I think it's a relatively unique product as these things go. I mean, in practice, the competition is not so much another software company, but it's a company's internal IT departments. And so where people say we can do all this ourselves, or it's not a problem we need to solve. And so that's, the competition in practice is the internal IT departments in various corporations.
Let me ask you secretly, are you interested in coming to Japan?
I would love to.
Kengo, how are you going to achieve that with Palantir Japan? I heard that you guys have a joint venture going on with Palantir. And what's your approach in entering into the Japanese market with this new company?
Well, thank you very much for the question. And before I talk specifically about what sort of investment I'm expecting Palantir Japan to do, I would like to share the general view of problem challenges that Japan has with you and participants. One, as you know, it is said that Japan is 5 years behind the rest of the world in terms of digital society data. And Japan needs, of course, great courage to break away from the past. No great return, a great reset is something we have to do. Now, having said that, there are many things that Japan can boast to the world. For instance, we have a society with relatively stable, safe, and in terms of soft power, we have a lot of culture and beautiful scene and cuisine, whatever. And hopefully, there's no telos such as, you can see in other countries. On the other hand, as I told you, in addition to the serious delay in terms of digital usage or digital literature in the society, we have other serious problems such as aging society or decreasing labor force, and plus serious fiscal deficit that is going to be worse and worse, particularly after this COVID-19. So all these plus and minus can be easily compensated, overtaken by great things. What is that? It's a real data. Japan is the #1 quality real data company in terms of number, in terms of quality, because one, we have introduced almost 100 years ago the universal health insurance system Nobody can avoid from this system. You are supposed to be in, not opt out. Plus, nursing care system, also that is mandatory. All these data can be collected as real data from one person to other person. And you can identify the owner of the data, or you can identify from whom the data was created. That means real data, very clean. On top of this, we have state-of-art manufacturing industry where we have R&D laboratory and other factories. IoT are creating or collecting great real data from everywhere in Japan. Now, what I'm going to tell you is that yes, with this full of real data and the soft power and the value system, minus challenges that Japan has to overcome, as I told you, what is left is the technology to use real data to show the people or government that this is it. This is something we have to do, like it or not, based on the fact and evidence. That is macro issue or macro investment policy that Japan has to do. That on my part, as a head of Sompo International or Sompo Holdings, as I told you, I'm such a wealthy person in terms of real data, maybe more than Saudi Arabia in terms of real data, because really? I have nursing care business where more than 100,000 people are acting and creating data every day, by dieting or eating or practicing, whatever, dementia too. Also, I have a real data from insurance industry, like accident or natural disaster or sickness, whatever. All these real data combined together, what sort of picture can you get is the issue I am looking for. And I'm sure Peter is ready to be very, very helpful to us. Now we have already initiated a project called Project Samurai, headed by myself and his partner, Alex Karp. And of course, authorized by Peter. So with this, on this platform, we're going to come up with some solution that is, of course, beyond insurance. That is, of course, beyond some material things. The services that is good for not just quality of life. This is the point. What I'm looking for is not quality of life. It's a quality of death.
Wow, that's a big statement.
Right. Minami-san, you know Japanese, so you know what does pinkoro mean? Yeah. Pinkoro is the best society that we should look for. For the sake of for Peter to understand pinkoro, I just want to tell you, pinkoro is you live until the last day with laughter and spry life, with swift death, no pain. Mm-hmm. Maybe at the age of 50, 60, 80, 100, whatever. Mm-hmm. You have to live actively with laughter until the last day and death. That will create great society and great good pleasure on fiscal deficit, right?
Seems like you're going to transform your company from not an insurance company to something else.
Yeah, that's right. That's the point.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what our country needs, right? But Peter, moving forward, other than Palantir, what are some like buzzwords or keywords that are in your mind in February 2021? We love to hear what you see, not just in the U.S. globally. What are some keywords that are gonna be in the business world going forward?
Well, I always think one has to be careful about buzzwords because they get overused and perhaps nowhere more than in Silicon Valley. And so I always tend to be very scared when I hear buzzwords and run away from a little bit. But I think it's been a very, very strange and crazy last year. And in some ways, I'm just trying to make sense of what's happened in 2020 and what it means. And what I've been thinking, my interpretation of 2020 is that we should think of it as the first year of the 21st century. And that what was supposed to happen in the 21st century, if we went back to 1999 and 2000, it was going to be the new economy was going to replace the old economy. And there was much of the new economy that was not quite ready. It was flimsy. It was a financial bubble. It blew up in March of 2000, 3 months into the new century. And then in some sense, March 2020, when the COVID crisis really hit, is when this shift to the new economy started. And I sort of wonder if this time around it's like 1999, 2000, same movie, but it will be a different ending in which the new economy will emerge as the stronger piece. And that's what, and there are things about it that are scary, that are disruptive. Maybe not everything about it is positive, but it is the future we have to lean into and that we have to build. And I think again, there's a Japanese perspective, there's an American perspective, but there's sort of a question: what took so long, and why did the 21st century take 20 years to start? And I think in the United States, I'll frame it negatively on the U.S. and positively on Japan. But I think in the United States we have a lot of very dysfunctional zombie institutions that do not work terribly well, and the inertia just kept going on and on and on. And I think the universities in the U.S. cost more and more money, and technologies you do more with less. And there are a lot of dysfunctional institutions that get more expensive every year. The healthcare system in the U.S. is dysfunctional. The universities are dysfunctional, and somehow 2020 was just an enormous shock to the system. Even a lot of the cities in the United States do not work terribly well. They're unsafe. They're incredibly expensive. They have impossible traffic jams. Nothing functions. And the 21st century solution is maybe we have to telecommute, or maybe you have to work remotely. And somehow, even though the disruption from COVID seems very drastic, I think it was very, very long overdue. And then in some ways, I think of Japan as perhaps, the best functioning 20th century country still. It is, Tokyo is a fantastic city. Everything works incredibly well. It is actually the most affordable middle-class city in the developed world, certainly at its scale. And I think even in Japan, the question is, I think Japan functions so well that it's perhaps the one developed country where if we got rid of all computers, it would still work almost as well as it does today. But it's precisely because Japan functions so well that the IT revolution has been the least needed in Japan of any country. And then the challenge in Japan is you have to deliver even better solutions on IT, so that even in a society functioning as well as Japan, it's enough of an improvement to make a difference that you can take it to the next level. And so I think somewhat different situations in the U.S. and Japan, but in both places, eventually the future arrives. The future has arrived, and we have to figure out a way to make it work.
Yeah, there's a lot of opportunities available here, and there is a lot of investments coming in from overseas. I run one of the bigger startups here in Japan, but weekly, monthly, there's global investors that want to talk, and there is a huge opportunity here, and we love to have you in the ecosystem here in the startup world here in Japan. But I saw a news release recently where you kind of gave a warning towards Silicon Valley. We in Japan love Silicon Valley, and we see it as a holy grace for innovation and technology. But I saw that you gave it a statement, giving out some warnings towards the Silicon Valley culture. What was that about?
Well, I always think that Silicon Valley is a little bit too self-congratulatory. It's one of the things that the U.S. is always very strong at sales and marketing, and then the danger with being too good at sales is that you just it's nothing but propaganda, and you end up believing your own propaganda too much. And so I think the story that Silicon Valley likes to tell about itself is that it is the center of innovation, that it's innovating incredibly fast and making the world a better place. And I think there certainly has been some innovation in Silicon Valley, but the temptation in Silicon Valley is always to exaggerate and self-congratulate too much on this dimension. And I think I think in many ways the story of the last 2 decades, 2.5 decades has been, there's been a lot of progress around computers and information technology, but then many other areas it has been slower than one would like. We are not necessarily, there have not been as many breakthroughs in many other areas as one would like. When I was an undergraduate at Stanford, I thought of going into biotechnology, and in some ways it was good that I didn't, because it turned out to be a relatively slow field. But on some level, if we can make progress there, that would be maybe more important than in the software world, where President Nixon declared war on cancer in 1971, said we would beat cancer within 5 years, and it's 50 years later, and maybe we're closer than we were 50 years ago, but it feels certainly more than 5 years away. And so in a lot of areas, there's been this challenge, and that I think we and again, it's hard to say what one does or how one accelerates things, but I think in many ways it is we need to figure out ways to apply computers to all sorts of different areas. So it's not just software running on its own in some decoupled virtual world. It's computers applied to biotech. It's computers applied to healthcare, applied to finance, applied to all sorts of dimensions of the real world. And that's hopefully how we can sort of broaden the cone of progress to many other things.
It seems like the innovation will continue everywhere.
Well, it does, but it's always a question of how fast. I think we can do it faster than we've been doing it. So
it's like the Lord of the Rings movie.
Yes.
In a lot of ways. It's a never-ending story, I assume. Kengo, like Peter just talked about a few things about Japan, and he gave some positive remarks and feedback on how our country is run. But I've seen you give out some statements on, the critical situation of our country and our economy. What would be some warnings that you would give out to Japan?
Yes, thank you very much for the good question. But let me first tell you, when I talk about warning, that means a chance. Accepting the warning or disadvantage, we know what sort of a chance we're going to have for the future. Well, before that, let me be more specific. First of all, I have to agree that accept that Japan has come down from the hill from this level to this level for the last 30 years, gradually and slowly. Nevertheless, no radical, let alone painstaking radical change, societal change yet. Why so? Easy. 30 years ago, Japan was by any means, number 2 in terms of size of the country in the world. And we are always a democracy-based country. And 30 years ago, not just monetary terms, but other quality terms, other things could give us a great satisfaction. I mean, if I may use this word, cozy society was there 30 years ago. And maybe some of the people in Japan started realizing, oh, something's wrong is taking place outside Japan. Take a look at what China is doing. Take a look at US and others are doing, particularly in US. What about what's going on in Silicon Valley, Tel Aviv, or even India, Shenzhen, whatever. But everybody try to not to see the fact, truth, because we are so cozy. We are so happy because of that level of economic size and quality, and the speed of decline is so slow that pain was not felt, and not enough to create the sense of urgency. We must do something to encounter this problem. And 30 years passed.
Wow.
And no way to escape from this stagnation. I mean, we cannot bog down anymore. So, having said that, as I told you, luckily enough, the good part of Japan still there. As I told you, society with stability. And can I use the word, in Japan, we use the chuyo, or in other words, in English, golden mean. It's not just a mean, it's a golden mean. You have to have certain range of variance, higher level and lower level, highest level, lowest level, in terms of wealth, in terms of education, in terms of whatever. So gap is necessary, but that gap has to stay within certain range in order to maintain stability or maximization of some of all people, maximization of happiness of all people. We don't want somebody to be very top, enjoying everything. So winner takes all type of big game. It's not suitable in Japan. Don't know what to do from now. But anyway, this is Japanese society. Now my point is that despite of all the difficulties, the challenges I described to you already, we may be able to provide some role model for the next capitalism. If you like stakeholders of capitalism, that stakeholder may improve or should improve planet Earth. Stakeholder capitalism is not something that could be achieved in abstract words. You have to be specific. You have to have some model, and you have to have certain type of value system. That is core of this stakeholder capitalism. Then when it comes to value system, as I told you, I felt, well, I can share the value system with Peter and Alex. That's why I have it. Now, my suggestion is that let's not criticize, hey, Japanese people, let's not criticize Japan too much. Why don't you look at straightforwardly what the problems are, what the challenges we have to overcome for the next 10, 20 years. And at the same time, why don't we revisit Japan history to convince ourselves that there are super, super great things that could be shown or boasted to the world, as I told you. So mixture of this, combination of this should create a role model for the next democracy and next capitalism. I hope.
Very, very positive outlook. Peter, so basically, we talked about some negatives and, some of the fears that are happening in Japan. I know you're not a Japanese specialist, but from your perspective, how do you see Japan? Like, I know you're not a specialist, so I don't want to go too much in details. But from your perspective, looking at, we're still the third biggest economy in the world. We have 25 million people. there is a lot of room for digitalization or digital transformation for that sake. From your point of view, or from a global perspective, how do you see Japan?
Well, I think there certainly are things that are unique to Japan, but there also are some important ways that the challenges Japan has are not unique at all. We have, throughout the developed world, we have aging populations, we have fiscal problems. There's a certain sense of stagnation that's very deep in Europe and in the U.S. And I think that maybe 15 years ago, say 2005, people often pointed at Japan and said, well, it's this one country that has all these more problems than these other countries. If we look at it from the point of view of 2021, it's much more that we're all in the same boat, and we have very similar challenges, and in many ways, Japan has handled these challenges far better than, let's say, the U.S. or Germany, where I was born, and so that's I think so. The way to think about it is very different now from how one would have thought about it 15 years ago. I think there are. I'll say my one. I always like asking, what do you believe that people don't agree with you about, and so what's your contrarian idea? And the one I would say on Japan is that I think people often say that Japan is somehow this very imitative country where everyone just copies everybody else or things like this. And perhaps I think it is perhaps the least imitative country in the world. It is the most unique, distinctive. Its culture is still very intact. The sort of ways it is and it is what's sort of there's sort of so many things about going to Japan where you have things are different, they're unique, people do things in a distinctive way, and I think there's something about that that's quite valuable, and that one of the challenges in the Western world as a whole is that things have become homogenized in a very great way, and homogenization can mean efficiency, but it also means you have sort of societies that in many ways are less creative or things like that. So I think there's a way in which Japan is perhaps the least imitative and in certain ways the most creative country in the world.
I see. I mean, you spoke about uniqueness, right? And maybe I'm kind of pushing this a little bit too much forward, but if you were running Japan, and if you were to kind of push an industry or an area to invest in for our country, I know you make investments, in very unique and creative areas. Is there any areas that you would suggest for our country to invest in?
Well, I think the general intuition I have is that one should always double down on the things that you're strongest at. So the things that Japan is unusually good at, you should do even more of, and there certainly is. I think there are certain types of businesses that require very complex coordination, where you have to get a lot of different pieces to work together in just the right way, and that I think that sort of a business model has been perfected in Japan perhaps more than anywhere in the world. And there's something about those kinds of businesses that one should develop more, I think. But I don't think there's like a one size fits all. There's I do think there's this very interesting question about stakeholder capitalism. There's a sense that capitalism is not working that well anymore, in many places outside of Japan, and then we don't really know what the alternatives to that are, and there is sort of a I think there's always this interesting question where there was a history in Japan where obviously great companies were built, and somehow there was a post-World War II history, but then many companies predated that, and there was some point when these companies didn't exist, and somehow they were built over time. And the question is how one can do that today, and how does one think about doing this today? And that would be a question I would think about a lot. The German context is always, you have these great Mittelstand companies, and then you have this sort of odd startup ecosystem in Germany where no one thinks in terms of Mittelstand anymore, and somehow the time horizons are surprisingly short term, and people try to make things work very, very fast. And so I think there's some kind of value of the older industry that would be quite useful to transfuse into some of the newer companies.
I see. Do you think this innovation will come from a large corporation or from a startup? We have two types of participants in this conference today, so.
Well, there are, I always think there are different kinds of problems that can be solved by different scales of companies. When I started PayPal, one of the questions I was always asked was, why can't a bank do this? It's or a big banking institution. And in many ways, banks had bigger resources and longer time horizons, and they have all these customers. And so in theory, a bigger company is almost always better than a startup at doing things. And I believe the only countervailing thing, and the only way in which small companies are better, is that if they're well run, you don't have internal politics that slow things down this badly, and that the challenge in every big company is at some point the internal politics become extremely hard to overcome. And so you'd like to have big companies that can be run. If you have a big company that can be run without internal politics, it will beat everybody in the world.
I see. I was recently,
if you can't avoid the politics in a big company, hopefully you have some room for some startups where you can get some things done before the politics take over.
It must be a magical large corporation. But I was looking at the stock price in Japan. The Nikkei 225 was over 30,000 yen for the first time in 30 years recently. And I was looking at it's interesting, the top 50 market cap by market cap in the world in 1990, 32 out of the 50 companies was Japanese companies. And we probably have one, and it's Toyota. And they're a fascinating company, they're a great company. But I see that your good friend, Elon, is moving along very well. And, obviously manufacturing in the automobile industry is a very big, old traditional industry, our bread and butter. You see all these EVs and these new technologies coming into the mobility space. It's a big topic of discussion here in Japan. I'm not too sure if you're familiar with this industry, but how do you see this battle between Tesla and Toyota?
Well, there are all these, I have so many stories about Elon that I can tell from years and years ago. And I remember conversation I had with Elon back in 2008, which was, relatively early in the Tesla history. We were colleagues at PayPal back in 2000, 2001, 2002. And in 2008, I asked him, he was starting Tesla and was very excited about it. And when was the last successful car company started in the US? And the answer was Jeep in 1941. So there had not been a new car company in the United States in 67 years. And the normal interpretation would be, well, therefore you shouldn't start a car company because it's possible. And then Elon's interpretation was it was long overdue that there'd be a new car company. I think the way in which there was an opening for Tesla was that there was probably something about the electric car design that was quite different, and where you could get rid of a lot of the parts. It was somehow a much simpler product, and then when it was simpler, there were other things you could do more. So because you have no gears, no gears in the middle of the car, you could have a much larger console down the middle, and then you could have sort of more. It could be more digital with more computer displays, and so there were all these different ways that the comprehensive design. It was designed sort of this comprehensively new way. So it was not just like an electric car, it was a slightly different gasoline-powered car, but it was going to be something something quite different. You know, I think I do think that, you know, for a long time people did not take Tesla that seriously. I'm not sure one should always base things on the market capitalization of these companies, but probably they will have a lot more competition for electric cars after the stock price went up by a factor of 8 in the last year. So that's sort of both good thing for the company, but also it's going to be a challenge.
Yeah, it's very interesting to see how changes happening so fast in the last few years. It's just amazing. Kengo, is from your perspective, you know, you're head of the association, Japan Association of Corporate Executives. As a position as the head of the association, from your point of view, you know, what can we do uniquely different compared to the rest of the world? What would be an investment strategy if you were running Japan, which you're in a very close position?
There are 2 points I would like to emphasize here in making Japan not great, unique again. One, you know, as Peter correctly described, Japan is least or most difficult country to be initiated, to be imitated, as you said, because Japan has a unique value system based on Bushido, if you like, described by Dr. Inazo Nitobe. And actually, the Bushido is a rule of conduct, not a religion. Did I tell you that how flexible Japanese people is about religion can be described in this anecdote? When you're born, you are supposed to bring your baby child to shrine to be celebrated by a god. Which god doesn't care? I mean, it doesn't matter. When you get married, maybe you want to go to church to be celebrated by the Jesus Christ. Then, when you meet death, you'll be brought to temple to be guarded by Buddha. So God, Jesus Christ, Buddha, 3 gods. No problem. You know why? Because basically Japanese behavior, rule of conduct are described easily or very succinctly by the Bushido. That was almost has been cultivated for the last 150, 500 years, when the ancient wartime, there are plenty of barbarians, right? They only use violence, no logics, no talkings, violence. Muscle matters, weapon matters. Then they fought and fought years and years. Eventually, there comes one group, or 2 groups, or 3rd group, etc. And there are several leaders in this country. Then all of a sudden, the bosses, leaders, have realized that, wow, I have full of barbarians under me. How can I control them? Anytime they can kill me, cut my throat off. So they decide to come up with some rule of conduct to respect themselves, to contain themselves, eventually to control themselves, self-control. That is Bushido, if I may describe it very, very simplistic way. So it's not related to religion, but when they create that rule of conduct, they picked up something from Shinto God, something from Buddhism, maybe something from other religion too. So it's a mixture of all religion. It is said that in Japan, there are about 108 gods and equal. So my point is that Japanese people is not so serious about what God is important, what religion is important. Rather, we respect the rule of conduct implicitly taught, educated when they were at home or school. Like for instance, in elementary school, all children are supposed to clean up their classroom after the class. Although they have their own professional cleaner, they don't make any claims. They know that they are supposed to clean it. All these things. So my point is putting a nutshell. So unique in that sense, value system is quite unique, and that cannot be imitated by any countries because each country has a long history of value system. With that, based on that value system, we have, as I told you, capitalism. You can call on or under the scheme, or based on the criteria of what I call golden mean. You don't want to have extreme one, extreme powerful, extreme weak. You need to have a certain level of range. To keep that range, maximization of happiness of people can be guaranteed.
I see.
So these P plus is definitely the essence for Japan to be role model of Japan. But the only thing I would like to express and emphasize here is that, but what is desperately lacking in Japan is innovation, particularly for the last 30 years. We are an innovative country, used to be. Take a look at Konose, Matsushita, Panasonic, and Sony, and Honda. All these are innovative people, startups.
Yeah.
30 years. You're so lazy.
Well,
you're so cozy.
Right. The movement is happening, and as one of the representatives of the startup community, we're very thankful for you having this conference, bringing the corporates and startups together. And Peter, with regards to the topic on startups, what, from your perspective, what is the meaning of startups in as far as society? What should a startup be? What should it mean?
Well, it's I always think that it's both entrepreneur and startup are they're not ends in themselves, and so you don't start a business for the sake of starting a business, and you're not an entrepreneur for the sake of being an entrepreneur. I think one of my friends once told me I want to become an entrepreneur when I get older, and that's in some sense that's the wrong answer, because it's much more specific. And I think it's in some ways is a question of what the mission is. I think it's often it is not a purely individualistic thing to have a successful startup. It's more like a team sport almost. Is sort of what I think the closest analogy is. It's a small group of people who are united by a common mission, who see the world in a unique way, in a different way, and are trying to achieve something very different. And I think there are sort of a class of successful changes that started with startups and built them. I think the Royal Society in Britain in the 17th century was a small group of scientists, and that was a startup of sorts. The founding fathers of the United States was a small group that got together and started a new country. And so that's sort of what I think it is. And then in practice, it's always some combination of some product, there's a business strategy, and there are some people who are very motivated to do it. And if you get all of those things to work together in just the right way, it can be very successful. I think the venture capital or tech startup piece, it's again, it's in some ways the interest is not in small businesses for their own sake. You want the businesses to start small, but you want them to grow a lot. And in fact, if you look at the number of businesses in the U.S. per, let's say per 100,000 people, how many businesses are there per 100,000 people? the place where there are the fewest businesses per 100,000 people is Silicon Valley. So in a sense, in one sense, you could say it's the least entrepreneurial. Because most businesses are actually very small and in some sense never scale and aren't, and don't actually build something that's really outsized. And the challenge is to have these businesses that start small but can become very big over time. And that's what takes our society and our civilization, our world to the next level.
Well, we have a lot of CEOs from big companies in today's session, but what kind of advice would you give large corporations or enterprises on how to build a relationship with startups? I mean, I get this question a lot from large companies. How should large corporations or enterprises view or maintain or build a relationship with the startup or startup community from your point of view?
Well, I suppose there are sort of a number of different kinds of ways one can do it. There certainly are businesses that let's say provide enterprise software. So there sort of are questions whether you can become an early customer, or are there things that these businesses can do better than you can do yourself. There are certainly approaches where companies can invest, have sort of corporate venture funds and invest in an ecosystem of these businesses. It can be a way that part of the innovation can be outsourced, so maybe you invest in business and then acquire them after a while. So I think there's sort of a lot of different models for doing it. But I think it's always important to look at the particulars, and it has to sort of make sense. It's you don't want to get partnerships for their own sake don't make sense. It has to be like the small company has to offer something really valuable to the big company, and then the question is, are there problems they can solve better than you can solve, in which case you can work together, and if they can't, you should talk to somebody else.
Yeah. I mean, compared to the US, I'm looking at the Japanese market, and not much M&A happens between big companies and startups. Do you think M&A is one way or a method for large companies to kind of innovate themselves by acquiring startups?
There are all sorts of different versions. It certainly is one way that you have corporations get restructured. I think there are ways it can go. I always think financial engineering gets overstated in terms of how valuable it is.
Yeah.
But certainly there was probably a certain amount of restructuring that happened in the U.S. in the 1980s and 1990s when people allowed a lot more M&A to take place than before, and so I think there is probably some room for that. Yes.
Yeah. Great. Any messages to the entrepreneurs that are listening today?
Well, I don't know. Again, lots of messages. I think I can always sort of describe what I like to hear in a pitch, or if what you're doing. And one of the questions I always like to ask people is just to describe where your company will be in 2 years, 3 years, 5 years. And if the answer is vague and not very clear, that tells me that you haven't really thought about it. And if you haven't thought about it, that makes me think that you don't think your company will still be around in a few years. And so that's the kind of question that I think, the precision of the answer doesn't mean that's exactly what has to happen, but it indicates that you're at least thinking about the future. It's not a sprint, it's a marathon, it's a long race, and you have to get through every part of the race.
Well, it takes time, right, to build a company and make impact in the world.
It takes time to build a big company. It takes time, yes.
Yeah, I'm going through it myself, so but enjoying the ride. But I want to wrap things up because we are running out of time. I read your book Zero to One, obviously a few years ago, and I actually read it about a month ago while I was preparing for this moderation, right? And you ask in your book, what important truth do very few people agree with you? How would you answer that question yourself in February 2021, Peter?
Oh, well, you know, I've given you a few different answers already that I think, you know, Silicon Valley isn't innovating as much as people think, that I think, you know, I think the future, the answer I give at the start of my book, which I still believe is true today, is that the question of technology and of innovation is more important for the future of our world than the question of globalization. You know, I think we had many decades where there was a great stress on globalization, on global integration, and there were certainly economies of scale you got from that, or trade, or there were certain benefits that came from globalization. But I think the more important vector, you know, in the decades ahead, especially in the developed world, is going to be innovation and technology. You know, I always think that you know, in the 1960s, people divided the world into the first world and the third world, and the first world was sort of innovative, and the third world was sort of stuck. Nothing was happening. And so this was a picture of the world where you had innovation but no globalization. And today, people often divide the world into the developed world and the developing world. And so that's a globalization story, because the developing world is just catching up to the developed world. So it's a convergence story of globalization, but it's also an anti-technological picture, because when we say that the United States or Japan are developed countries, we say that they're finished, that they have nothing new to do, that they're done. And that seems to me to be too pessimistic. And so I would like us to ask the question of how we can develop the developed world. How do we take, you know, how do we take it further and not accept that this is it and this is the end?
Great. And any final messages to your new friends here in Japan? The people running the big companies and the startups? Any final message to everybody listening today?
You know, it's I don't know. It's not about any message I give you. It's just you know, you have to get to work and build the future.
Great, thank you. And Kengo, can I ask you the same question? What important truth do very few people agree with you on? What's your answer to the?
I fully agree with what Peter said about the future of globalism or global capitalism in the world. You know, convergence sounds like good, but eventually, I mean, effectively, it's not good, because, you know, diversity does not necessarily mean convergence, you know, in terms of quality. Now, my point is, you know, Japan tends to look at ourselves too pessimistically, too much, and cease to think positively, cease to create something new, cease to encourage young youth to stand up and say something, to do something. Now is the time for us adults to encourage, push youth, young people to move up, to do something. And same applies to big corporation. Maybe I'm the one of the winner in terms of politicking, because I am the CEO of a big corporation, but maybe so. But at the same time, I'm being struggling every day about how good for us to be ourselves just by employing talents, inside talents. Rather, why don't we resort to outside talent, looking for or investment into new startups? So it's not something that we should do it ourselves only. We just want to fulfill our mission by employing or resorting the best talent resources, inside, outside, doesn't matter. So maybe I hope the biggest rival is going to be the big company for startups. If startups are unique enough or strong enough, special enough then big corporation will do it by buying it or by doing it themselves. So it's a good combination. It's a good rivalry or competition. Having said that, I would like to say just 2 words and 2 sentences for big corporation as well as startups. One, if you want to be innovative, this is a time to take action for diversity and inclusion. Diversity and inclusion is a key word. It's not just a must. It's a strategy, basic strategy. 2, no matter how old you are, be curious. A curiosity matters, and therefore character matters. With 2 words, I would like to thank all of you very much.
Great. So we're out of time. Peter, thanks for staying with us for a little bit extra today. And Kengo, again, thanks for your messages. My wrap up is just one word: just do it. Right? Just do it. That's how I'm going to wrap up the session. And I hope that the message is clear and loud to everyone listening today. So Peter, we hope to see you here back in Japan. The associate would love to have you offline, and thank you for joining us at a late hour.
Awesome. Yeah, good afternoon, good night to me.
Good night.
Please invest into the Japanese startup system.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good night.
Bye-bye.
皆様ありがとうございました。以上をもちまして特別セッションを終了いたします。